Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world you're in. Welcome to the Venture Outfitter. I'm real excited to join you today. And we've got a very special speaker named Paul Young, who's been a long-term tech rancher as well as quite a powerhouse in product marketing in Austin and around the world. So we'll hop right in. The whole purpose of the Venture Outfitter is to allow you to connect your venture into all the network of ventures that we're pulling together. Real excited about what's happening because we continue to get a lot more countries involved in what's happening. One of the questions that I want to ask, so I've been a long-term ecosystem leader in Austin, and it seems like things are coming back together finally after COVID. But one of the questions that you're going to hear me talk about more is how do we unite Austin? And so I'm one of the authors of a model of entrepreneurship that I call the Austin, model of entrepreneurship. Make a long story short, I think though that we're at this interesting crossroads. And one of the things I said in my recent speech, I just was in Chile a couple of weeks ago, or actually a week ago, and I led a speech and I said, Detroit was the technology capital of the world for 60 years. And then all of a sudden something happened and it lost its way. I'm kind of concerned for the inflection point. So when I talk about Austin, it's not just about Austin, it's also about recognizing that we're at this interesting inflection point. And part of the venture bridges that we're tying together around the world, part of what I want to make sure we do is bring things together. Now, I think Austin needs to do this itself. I think we've gotten a little bit divided over the years, especially COVID kind of separated us a lot. Obviously, the politics of our land is creating difficulties, and that shows up in Austin. It shows up around the world. But if you're interested in being a part of the conversation about how to unite Austin, and then even if you're not physically in Austin, the real premise about this is to take it to the world. I'd like you to let me know. If you don't know how to get a hold of me, send a text, send a chat or something like that, because I'll be collecting a group of people as a kind of a subcommittee to be working on that. Today, in lieu of sponsors, I just want to thank a number of different organizations that are making these venture bridges that we're building around the world possible. In Japan, the Japan Trade Organization; in Austria, Advantage Austria; in Mexico, the state of Chihuahua, and specifically the Secretary of the Economy and Innovation in Chihuahua. The World Affairs Council had a wonderful event yesterday. Part of what we'll be doing is we're going to start recognizing more of the organizations that are here. There are a number of Chamber of Commerce, both in Austin and other parts of the world, that are a part of this network. But we wanted to recognize these groups. The three countries that are represented right here, we have active venture bridges with, and we're in conversation with another 8 right now to really tie this in. Part of the idea is if you believe that there's a possibility that all the world's problems have already been solved, just a matter of connecting the entrepreneur with a solution to the market with a problem. Part of our work is to be that connective tissue, both as a Tech Ranch as an organization, but more importantly, the Venture Outfitter community and how we're tying things together. So let's give an example about something like that. Simple technologies that matter. So there's this idea of, these are slides from one of our Japanese companies that, world change can happen in the most simple ways. There's a problem of welding, which is a core technology of manufacturing. And these are the type of welds that you'd find inside of a battery. And why do you care about that? Well, a lot of, as we're moving to the electrification of transportation, mobility, it's more likely that the next car that you buy is going to be electric versus gas, just because of the change that's happening. But there's some problems. You can see off to the right in these pictures that, one of the biggest issues that I think there is some fear about is that lithium batteries have tending to catch on fire and have all sorts of problems. Well, the numbers, by the way, side note, electric vehicles are like about 1/5 of the number of problems that gas vehicles have. It's just because they're electric, they kind of get more visibility. But one of the ways they've even taken on these issues is this new technology coming out of Japan that does a different kind of weld. They do welds in, if you see here, like, using vibration in circles versus back and forth, as you see on the linear vibration example. All right, why is that important? Many of you are like, you're like, hey, I'm not a technologist. Why do I care? The main thing that we're getting to see is this is a technology out of Japan that we're in the process of introducing into northern Mexico and other parts of the world, and obviously here in the Austin area. But it's simple steps like this with just a handful of connections that you might imagine that if this set of welds was in a car that got hit by another car and the battery had some type of issue, these are the type of things that are going to prevent that battery from catching fire or having a likeliness that it doesn't have the problem that we might have read about or seen on TV. It's really, really simple about how just a handful of connections can lower the cost as well as lower the danger from issues like lithium battery catching fire because of some kind of little spike that's happening inside of the battery. So I don't know. I like using this example. Many of you will never touch this manufacturing example at all, but it's one way that just by being tied together, we can actually solve problems together. And I'm real excited. Texas is bringing Japan and northern Mexico together, and it's through these type of venture bridges that change will happen in a powerful way. Speaking about that, coming soon, next week, we're going to be celebrating Ukrainian Independence Day, and we'll have someone from the Ukrainian consulate here on the program. I hope to have the consul himself. I will be going to Houston for the Ukrainian independence celebration. If you're interested in joining and you don't have information about it, just let us know. We'll be happy to share that. I think it's important for us to continue. Technology implicitly has a impact on culture, and therefore on we have to have an ethic. And I think it's important for us as technologists and entrepreneurs that we know what our ethic is. I want to make sure that, at least from my standpoint, I'm strongly behind the Ukrainians, and I'm excited about being there. Then we're going to have Tom Singer, who is the head of the Austin Technology Incubator, on August 31st. And Tom and I are going to be talking a little bit more about this idea about some of the issues that we see in Austin and how is it that we can bring Austin together, unite Austin together in a bigger way. So real excited about that. Tom is a long-term community leader here in Austin. He also is a public speaker and has been speaking around the world and has some really interesting insight about that. We'll hear from him as well. Product Camp is the gentleman that we're going to be hearing from. Paul is one of the guys that was behind Product Camp. We'll get him to do a shout out in a little bit about what this is. But if you haven't been to a Product Camp, this is a great event here in Austin. And so some of the concepts that Paul would be talking about, if you want to go a little bit farther down the path, on September 9th for free, you can actually register. Sometimes they quote unquote sell out, even though it's a free membership to go to. So you might want to sign up for that pretty soon. And I don't know if they're still calling for speakers, but this is an unconference where everyone kind of decides at the last minute what they're going to propose. And they go there. So pca29.eventbrite.com. I don't think this is on the Tech Ranch website just yet under our events, but we'll add it later today so that you can find this easily if you're looking for it. All right. Well, today's speaker, most importantly, many of you have given me feedback. Hey, Kevin, I'd like to hear you less. I'd like to hear more of the speakers because you've got some rock stars. Today's speaker, Paul Young, is one of the rock stars. He was a Tech Rancher way back when he was launched a venture and got involved in Tech Ranch. I don't remember which venture fourth cohort that was. I'll ask him in just a little bit. But the thing that we'll do is he's got a really extensive background. The main thing that I know him about is his product management and product marketing background. Because every time I've heard him speak, I've learned something about, oh crap, we should be working with Tech Ranch programs. And it really helps a lot of us as entrepreneurs, especially for those of you all that are international entrepreneurs, to be able to hear from someone who has a really in-depth background of product marketing, product management. This is one of the places where the United States excels, but then there's still entrepreneurs like myself that actually need the support of a guy like Koym to teach us more. So with that, let's do this. Paul, let's see. I think make sure that that we bring you onto the screen and just say hello real quick.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
And,
great to have you here. I'm excited to have you here.
Likewise.
Which Venture Forth cohort was it? Do you remember the number?
I think it was like number one.
Yeah,
it was 15 years ago.
It's been quite a long time. It's great to see where you've you engaged, you became an expert, and then kicking ass, taking names in the work that you're doing. So
no, I appreciate that. And I'm a big fan of Tech Ranch and always say yes whenever Tech Ranch comes calling. And Kevin as well for all the work that you do. So it's great to meet everybody. Hope everybody's having a wonderful Thursday wherever in the world that you are. Today we're going to talk about building what I call a market-driven company, one that is connected to its market and really understands the needs of its market well, so that it can address those pressing needs in the market. As Kevin mentioned, every week I work with companies all over the world of different shapes and sizes. In my day job, I am a professional trainer and instructor on this topic that we're going to go over today. I also have worked on several different startups. I work with founders and entrepreneurs quite a bit as well. And one of the things that is very, very typical that I find whenever I go in and work with companies and founders is that they're really concerned about failure of their product, failure of their company. And it's backed up by statistics. Like, that's not an unfounded fear. If you look at some of the statistics that come out of the industry about failure, I just grabbed a couple of them for you to see here. Failure is more of the norm than it is the exception when it comes to building products and startups. Think about this: 75% of venture-backed firms don't return their capital. 92% of startups fail within 3 years. That's probably higher now during COVID or post-COVID. And I'm sure you've all seen statistics such as these. It's really never a surprise to me. And in fact, I've had this experience myself where I was working on a startup of my own that didn't work out for a variety of reasons. But if you dig into why these failures occur, that's the more interesting piece. There's a research firm called CB Insights that did some research about why startups and products fail. And they produced an entire list based on interviews with people just like you. You can see number one cited reason for failure was we identified there wasn't a market need for whatever we were creating. But if you look a little bit further down the list at some of the other things on here, there's a bunch of stuff on here that I would consider code word for we didn't listen to our market. And as a result, we created the wrong thing. Obviously that first one, but if you look down here, user unfriendly products, ignored customers, product mistimed, and so on. I mean, those are all basically saying the same thing, which is we didn't listen to our market, and as a result, what we created didn't resonate. And so if you've ever read Eric Ries and his book, The Lean Startup, which is really popular, I'm sure many of you have read it, he captures this thought in a really nice, succinct way when he says the biggest waste of all is building something nobody wants. Now, I'm sure that none of you would ever do that intentionally. Like, I'm sure Bert doesn't wake up this morning and say, you know what I want to do today? I want to build a product or service that no one is ever going to want or use. But it happens. And one of the biggest reasons why it happens, in my experience, is that when founders, entrepreneurs, product managers, they tend to focus on the internal issues of their company. So you could call that hiring and firing. You could call it working with investors. You could call it putting together your business plan. Or in a larger company, it's just going to the meeting after meeting after meeting that's happening on their schedule day in and day out. I call that focus inside out, because your focus is on the four walls of your company, what's happening inside the four walls of your company or your Zoom meetings. The danger for inside out focused founders and teams is that inside out focused teams have a strong tendency to build inside out focused products as a result. And when y'all are thinking of an inside out focused product, what I want you to think about is a product that we built, not because we should, but because we could. And I always know I'm talking to an inside out focused founder when they say things like, well, Kevin, wouldn't it be a great idea if we built this, or who wouldn't want a whatever? And they don't really have the market justification for it. And this is not just a philosophical discussion. I actually brought a for example of an inside out product that I would consider in the hall of shame for this kind of conversation. So I don't know if any of you have followed this little case study over the last couple of quarters or years. If not, I want to introduce you to the cautionary tale of Juicero. Some of you might be familiar with this. This is a real product, by the way. I'm not making this up. Juicero was a Silicon Valley-based startup because, Kevin, of course, they were in Silicon Valley, and they were going to change the world with this.
It's going to be big. It's going to be big, Paul.
Huge, right? If we could just get 1% of people drinking juice, imagine. But they were going to put this juicer on every countertop in the world. So you'd have one of these in your office. You'd have one of these maybe in your home. And their founder fell in love with the technology that was behind this thing. He would get into interviews and talk about it. He would say that they used, high grade, like military componentry to build the device. And he would talk about the press that would squeeze the juice out of that little packet. It was so strong that, in his words, it could pick up 3 Teslas. I'm not sure why that's important, but he would talk about that. But let me ask everybody a question. You can come off mute and answer me on this one. If you were to go out today and shop for a regular old juicer, not maybe something this fancy, but just a regular juicer. If you were to go to your local store, if you were to get on Amazon, what would your budget be? Like, what would you plan to spend if you were to go shop for a regular juicer? Any ideas?
$30.
30? Okay.
I was going to say 150, but
Sure. I mean, there's a range, right? Adam, what do you think?
The Ninja, what's the Ninja run? Like $100 or something like that?
Yeah, I think so. Somewhere in that range.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. Fair enough.
Now, $200 would be a max.
200 max. I mean, like anything, Artie, you could spend as much as you want to spend. I'm sure that somewhere out there in the world, somebody has built a $10,000 juicer that Bill Gates is about to lose in his divorce. But the point is, they took a little bit different path with their pricing on this product. This Juicero juicer we're looking at here was $700. But it was Wi-Fi enabled.
Wow.
Which costs like $10 to add that chip.
Oh, sure.
Who needs Wi-Fi?
I was gonna say 700 just for Wi-Fi, really.
Exactly. Now, I'm sure within the 4 walls of the Juicero startup, their founder, their initial executive team, their investors, they all looked at each other and said, Richard, who wouldn't want a $700 Wi-Fi enabled juicer? Right up until the point where they launched it, they found out that the answer to that question was nobody. At least not enough to build a business around. And so we share this as an example of inside out thinking. This is a product in search of a problem, not the other way around.
Yep.
The thing that really killed this, it actually wasn't the fact that it was $700, although that didn't help. It also wasn't the fact that this product literally didn't work if Wi-Fi was unavailable. Kind of silly. The thing that killed this product were the juice packets. So like if you go back here for a second, these packets, you stuck into the machine, they made the juice. Kind of makes sense a little bit because have y'all seen the, Kevin and I were talking about an espresso or Keurig machine for coffee? I mean, that's really successful. In fact, it's like so successful, it's an environmental disaster. And so this thing is like the same model, right? Razors and blades. But those packets had a couple of problems. First of all, they were $8 each. And they had a shelf life of only 1 week. You start to see some of the issues here, right? So when they launched this, they sent it to Bloomberg for review. It got completely tore up and this thing failed. Obviously, that company went out of business. But here's a fun little factoid for those of you that are aspiring founders or startup founders. This company burned through $125 million in VC on their way to failure. Pretty amazing, right? So that's like the danger of inside out thinking. Now, luckily, there's an antidote to inside out. We're going to look at it briefly here today. We call it outside in. And the idea of outside in is before we build anything, let's spend just a little bit of time and energy out there in the market, understanding our buyers, our users, their problems, and then building something in reaction to that. And I brought an example of what this looks like as well, just to keep it simple. Every successful outside-in product is always going to have the same thing. It's always going to start with a problem. And you heard this in Kevin's little presentation at the beginning about the batteries. They're solving a problem, right, with those different welds. This picture also exhibits a problem, very different problem. Have any of you ever gone to the store, you bought a stock of bananas, by the end of the week, it looks like that? Not too appetizing?
No, rotten.
I tried to do a smaller one because of that.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so maybe you're trying to address that problem in different ways. But what if I told you there's an innovative retailer in Korea that has solved this problem? There's a retailer out there called Emart that packages up their manji bananas like this. So you got a banana for today on the left. By the time you get to the end of the week, that one will be ripe and ready to go. Now, it's a really simple illustration here, but the point is you would never make this kind of product or packaging decision by accident. You make it by knowing your buyers and users. And Paulina, to your point, I'm guessing what happened is that their product team went out into the stores and they saw people buying smaller bundles, or maybe ripping off bananas of varying ripeness to make their own custom set. And they said, let's just do that for them, solve a problem for them, charge more for it. And so the point here is we need that outside in thinking if we want to be connected to our market. We don't want to just dream up ideas internally and then hope, because hope is not a strategy. You've probably heard that before.
Well, to elaborate on that, it also depends on the amount of people in a family, right? Like if I was living with multiple people, then a bigger bunch of bananas, you would be eaten up quicker versus if you're by yourself, that becomes a thing too.
That's right. Absolutely. So, I mean, it's not one size fits all, to your point, but maybe, I need a different packaging for this for the large family versus the small. I don't know. So if we want to be more outside in as an organization and as a founder, what do we do? Well, for many people, when they're starting a company, if they're thinking about entrepreneurship, one of the first places they turn to is here. Known as the traditional marketing mix, the 4 Ps. Y'all ever seen these before? I'm sure you have. Many people have. These have been around forever. Product, price, promotion, place. I love the 4 Ps, but let's recognize for just a moment that the 4 Ps have a critical flaw. And the critical flaw here is that they create a very inside out view of the world. And just to show you how this happens, let's walk through them really quick. Starting on the left, the product P. The product P on the left is asking a question: what is our product going to look like? The pricing P, how are we going to price it? Promotion, how are we going to promote it? And place, how are we going to sell it? Can you see how that's all about us? You don't have to know anything about your market to answer those questions. Now, obviously you should, but I can't tell you how many founders and entrepreneurs I work with week in and week out who basically say, hey, Paul, YOLO, it's 2023. Obviously our product should be a Tableau-based dashboard built on AWS. And obviously our pricing should be per seat per month. And obviously our promotional strategy should rely on influencers, on TikTok or whatever, maybe, but probably not. For example, I worked with an organization just a couple of months ago who they basically were selling their product to 3 buyers in the world. And the 3 buyers in the world for their product were the FBI, the NSA, and the Department of Defense. Now, do you think buyers like the FBI want a product that's all based up in the public cloud? No way. Can't even use it. Do you think buyers like the NSA rely on influencers flexing on TikTok to make their purchase decision? I mean, Kevin, to your point earlier about politics, nothing would surprise me at this point, but I hope not. I hope not.
Right.
So it's for that reason that if the goal is to be outside in instead of inside out, there's a 5th P that we're going to add called the problem. What problem exists in our buyers and users that we need to solve? Once we research and understand the problem, everything else can be then wrapped around it. If I know the problem to be solved, what product or service do we need to create to solve the problem? What price are people willing to pay to have the problem solved? What promotional strategy will help us access those who have the problem, and so on. So it all gets back to the problem first. And that's why I would say, whether I'm talking to a product manager, a CEO, a founder, an entrepreneur, job number one before recruiting, before getting investors, before anything else, is being able to clearly articulate what problem are we solving and for whom. And if we can't do that, we don't have a viable business. Every successful product in the world solves a problem for somebody. Sometimes that problem is not completely obvious in the beginning, but we need to be able to have an inkling of what that problem is. The reason that I'm so big on focusing in on the problem first and making that our North Star, our guiding light, can be kind of boiled down into this one thought, which is that in the end, your opinion, although interesting, it's irrelevant, right? It's not about what you think. It's about what you can prove with data, with research, and by talking to your buyers and users. I don't know, Kevin, have you ever met anybody?
I'm laughing to myself because one of the things that I say, although I'm trying to change my style a little bit, is to say, like, hey, your baby is ugly. and because too many times it's hard to I try to say it tongue in cheek so people know that it's like we're trying to have fun with this, because people take their own opinions of, like, this technology is so great. And I come out of this, I come out of the same background. I have what I call engineering-itis. Yeah, you know, where the engineering is leading the conversation versus the market concern, right? The product market concern that you're talking about. Totally.
I totally get it from a founder perspective. Like I've walked a kilometer in those shoes. Like,
yeah, but it's so cool.
It's so cool. Let me talk to you about my solution. You can't wait to hear about my technology and the cool features I built. It's got, you know, self-healing AES 256-bit quantum encryption, blah, 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 blah. Guess what? Nobody cares.
Wait, and the other side of it too is
it's solving a problem that they have.
Yeah, or the other side of this, just to throw this out here, because this is part of what I push on even more, is that they're focused on the $4 gazillion market versus some smaller set of customers, like a $20 to $50 million set of customers, that although that's not a market you're going to build a large company with, you can really get intimate and understand their problem area, right? And if you understand something in that intimate level, then scaling makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I totally concur with what you're saying. And I think you and I both have learned the hard way. I mean, like through pain, through wounds, about saying, you know, because I come from a technology background. I come from an engineering background. I was a CTO for a good portion of my career. And I just, you know, it's so hard to.
I call that Kevin, I call that the 1% of China problem. So like, imagine if we could only get 1% of the China market, how huge that could be. And that's just completely unrealistic, because you're never going to get all that. This is, if we want to do another session later on market sizing, we could definitely do that, because that's another failure area. But like, I'm looking at Bert's background there, that with the EKG stuff, it's like I'm not saying this is you, Bert, but I talk to founders all the time who are like, I'm selling an EKG product. My market is anyone who has a heart. Like, okay, well, theoretically, yes.
Oh, hilarious. So the entire planet.
I mean, like, theoretically, yes, like anybody with a pulse could use your thing. But that's probably not your market. So like, that's the market, but there's a segment of that market who's receptive to whatever we're selling, and they have a problem of, I want to understand if my EKG is abnormal, or they have a problem of, I've got AFib and I want to deal with that, or whatever. So it's not the entire world, it's those who have the problem. The problem is what binds the market segment and sizes the market segment. That's why I always get hung up with executives on TAM, SAM, SOM. The TAM is not everyone with a pulse. The TAM is those who have the problem that we're solving.
Yeah, so total addressable market for, if you don't mind, give those three words, just so for some of our viewers won't, or some of our listeners won't necessarily know what those three words are, if you could.
Yeah,
just
TAM.
TAM, SAM, SOM.
Yeah, so TAM, I'll put this in the chat, is total addressable market. Think about it as like that, as like the biggest part, the biggest possible market we could go after. SAM is serviceable, I'll spell it wrong, addressable market. So who are we actually able to go capture? And then SOM is share of market. What are we going to get? A lot of people confuse the TAM and the SAM. They say the TAM is 1% of China, or the TAM is anyone with a pulse. That's not the TAM. The TAM is people who have the problem that you're solving. And then you can narrow it down from there. But that's where you see people like the whole joke about like a startup is not interesting to me unless it has $1 billion market size around it, comes from a misunderstanding of what TAM is. Anyways.
Yeah, and I think to just tie this into some of the other people that might be listening that are going through one of our programs right now, that one of the ways that we talk about this in the Venture Forth programming and the Venture Outfitter is there's bottom up numbers. Like, you might not be able to call everyone in that really large market, but a top down market is like 1% of China, like Paul mentioned, and how are you going to find them? How are you going to get a hold of them? Like bottoms up is how many calls can you make per week, per day? And then actually to even capture part of that. So that's why, I really want to hear from Paul, but you always remind me the most important discipline about how to find the market. So thank you for that.
Sure. All right, well, let's say that we recognize our opinion is not relevant. We want to get out into the market. How do we do that? For a lot of startup founders I go work with, a lot of entrepreneurs, they're like, hey, Paul, I'm already market driven. I already listen to my market today. Look at all the voices that I listen to. I talk to Kevin. I talk to investors. There are other founders that I talk to. There's customers. Maybe I got my first 1 or 2 customers. I'm talking to them. Don't they represent the market? And the answer is they might. They might. However, what we got to recognize with all these voices I'm showing here is they represent what we call, or what I would call, the noisy 20% of the market. And I call them the noisy 20% because these are examples of voices that will proactively pick up the phone and call you or email you and say, I want you to build me this thing. Make it look like this. And my really strong argument here is that you don't have to go seek out the noisy 20% because they will find you. That's what they do. They proactively come to you. You've got to go beyond them. And what that means is that we got to recognize the noisy 20% is going to come to you. You got to, if you just build for them, you're really pigeonholing yourself into a small subset of the market. There's a whole nother set out there that probably has the same or a very similar problem to what you're solving for the noisy 20, but they're not coming to you. I call that the quiet 80%. The quiet 80% are those that have the problem that you're solving, but for whatever reason, they won't proactively come to you. You have to go to them in your research efforts to really understand them. There's a lot of different ways you could do that. I'm happy to talk through any of these. I really like reaching out via LinkedIn on a startup effort that I'm working on right now. That's something that I've been doing, making those connections using networks. You can, if you have training for your product, you can get introductions from other customers into that quiet 80%. If you go to an industry event, like a conference or a trade show, what I would always train my team to do is to stand next to the coffee station, right? Wherever they're serving coffee or tea, and get really good at reading people's badge as they walk up in like a non-creepy way. And as somebody walks up, you just network with them like a human and you talk to them. You say, oh, hi, Adam, I see you're with so-and-so company. I'm just meeting people here at the event. Have you seen anything cool? And what you're going to find is that by making that human connection, it is 100 times easier to reach out to them later when you're doing research. But just making that human connection with the quiet 80% is critical if we want to later then understand their problems. Just out of curiosity, have any of y'all ever done stuff like this? Reached out to the quiet 80%, gone beyond those that are just coming to you?
Customer development, like cold emailing to get conversations. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Actually, in Austin, suitcasing, not going to the big conference, but going to the hotels, be a client of the hotel and walk the floor. Almost didn't talk to the guy, happened to be the president of the company, who took really interested in what we're doing. And it's not medical. We actually have a context EKG for solar. It's the analogy that actually works really well.
Okay, I love that. I love that. Oh, you went on mute there, Bert.
Oh, sorry. The big point was I almost didn't talk to the guy since I didn't see the surface relevance for he's just doing cables. It's like, wow, what's cables doesn't really associate with us. The problem was deeper, but that is in the industry, the problems he's seen. Essentially 14 days later, it wasn't coffee, it was a dinner. He wrote us a $250,000 check.
Amazing.
Almost didn't talk to the guy.
What an amazing
Happened in
success
Austin.
story.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I mean, that's an amazing story because it resulted in a big sale. But success doesn't always have to come in immediate sales like that. It could come in a better understanding of the problem so that you explode into a dozen of those types of sales, 6 months down the road.
And that was the key, understanding exactly why did he take an interest in, because there was a lot of complexity behind it that it took more than just the dinner, but the dinner was a starting point that was unraveling it.
Well, bravo for doing that.
So,
to your point, Bert, I want to take inspiration from Aaron Levy, the CEO of a company called Box.com. His quote here reinforces what you're saying. He says, you learn more in a day with customers than a week of brainstorming, month of watching the competition, or year of market research. And I can tell you that my experience has been just like that. There is no substitute for going directly into what I call your customer's native habitat, their native habitat, wherever they live or work, because that's where their problems are. And if we want to understand their problems, we have to go to where the problems are. And so there is the company I work for, Pragmatic Institute, that does this training. We have a word for how to do this market research in a structured way. We call it NAHITO. This is an acronym. Nothing important happens in the office. Or nowadays, I should call it NAHITZO. Nothing important happens on Zoom. But it's the same idea. You don't learn anything about your market sitting behind your desk and dreaming up great ideas. You only learn about the market by having those conversations. And so, I say this because, believe it or not, even though I'm a public speaker, I'm actually an introvert. So it takes a lot of energy for me personally to have those conversations, but it's critical, because if we don't, it's almost like you're flying blind without that type of, you're just on instruments at that point. You're just guessing.
If you don't mind me interjecting one thing too, I want to make sure that I throw this out here because I think it's implied by what you're saying, but I want to make it explicit. The one of the key things is you got to make sure too that you don't walk in front, go to the coffee shop and just say, hey, here's my product, here's my product, here's my product, here's my product. You need to be able to listen, right? You say something about that. I know that you naturally do that, Paul, because of your style. Versus going, it's not about getting out of the office to sell. Oh, yeah, here, sorry.
Kevin, you set me up. So thank you. Check is in the mail, as always. But to your point, when we're doing that NAHITO process of going out and talking to the quiet 80%, it's not about showing our product. I mean, it might be about showing our product eventually, but in the beginning, Adam talked about customer discovery, another word for this. What we're doing is observational research and interview research. Primarily, this is qualitative research. So the sample size is relatively limited. You're not going to do 1,000 NAHITO visits. You might do a few dozen, maybe. On that startup thing that I told you I've been working on, I recently concluded a research effort where we've talked to, about 50 people in my target market for about 30 to 45 minutes a piece. And we cataloged it, we recorded it on Zoom and so on, and we're mining that for insights. I just want to share a couple. Obviously in the limited time we have here today, I can't make you a PhD in ethnographic research, but I want to give you a couple of pointers if you aspire to do some of this for your own company or product, so you can think about what makes a good customer observation and interview. So on the observational side, oh, by the way, these two things happen simultaneously in the real world. You're observing while you're interviewing. But for today, we're going to peel it apart. It's a lot easier to learn them one at a time, but just realize they will happen simultaneously when you're doing it. For the observational side of market research, this is a really powerful tool. People do get their PhD in this area. It's called ethnographic research. But you don't have to be a PhD to do this well. You just have to follow a couple of high-level guidance. One of those is don't script it. Start with an open agenda. So what I don't want to do is I don't want to sit down and say, Kevin, for the first 5 minutes, show me how you run this report. And then for the next 5 minutes, show me how you assess the health of your solar panels. And then for the last 10 minutes, show me how you do this. Don't do that. Because when you script it that tightly, you lose the chance of spontaneity and learning something you didn't expect to learn, which is one of the big reasons why we do this. What you're seeking to understand is what does a day in their life look like? And a great way to do that is to look for these Post-it notes. Post-it notes are amazing. If you can get into their workspace, especially if you're doing a digital product like a service or a software product, look for Post-it notes around their monitor. If they were using our product and they had to write something down on a Post-it note and put it on their monitor, and then come back to that 5 minutes later and take the thing that was on the Post-it note and then type it back in, like why? Why do they have to do that? That is a failure in our technology that they're working around with the Post-it note. They shouldn't have to do that. So we're looking for those types of like inadequacies that they're using workarounds to address. Pick up a pencil, Alt-Tab to another product. These are all examples of that. If they're not using your product today, and Bert, I'm going to use you as an example just because I kind of understand what you're doing with yours. If they don't understand the EKG for their solar installation, what are they doing without that today? Are they ignoring the problem? Are they working around it manually by replacing things too often? Are they blissfully unaware and they're just like taking the cost of doing nothing? Like we need to understand what are they not doing in lieu of our product. Just remember, Kevin mentioned this. When you're in the field, you're doing this observational research. You have 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 mouth. You should use them in that ratio. You should listen and observe twice as much as when you talk, because when you're talking, you're not learning. Richard, I love that comment in the chat. That's amazing. Yeah, the ethnographic research is absolutely critical. Thank you for sharing that. All right, so that's the observational side, but the other side is equally important, and that's the interview side. When we interview somebody in a research setting, there's a very specific type of question that we need to ask. It's called an open-ended high gain question. So a question can be either open or closed-ended. Open-ended cannot be answered with a yes or no, closed-ended can. It can also be either high or low gain. High gain question gives you a lot of information in return. Low gain gives you very little. Our focus should always be on open-ended high gain. You get the best quality and quantity of information up here. And just to illustrate this, I'm going to do a little role play with Kevin. Kevin, I didn't tell you about this, sorry, but you're going to be my volunteer. So Kevin, I'm going to interview you right here, and I'm going to start off with a closed-ended low gain question. This is the worst type of question. We don't ever want to ask a question like this. So Kevin, are you wearing a red shirt?
No.
Pretty terrible question. I got nothing out of that. It was closed-ended, low gain, awful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it open-ended, although it's still low gain. What color shirt are you wearing?
Black shirt.
Better. At least it wasn't a yes or no, but it was still very low gain. I didn't get much info. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it high gain and open-ended. We should get more information here. Let's see. Kevin, when you woke up this morning, why did you choose that shirt in particular?
Why did I choose this shirt? Well, my girlfriend would give me a hard time, but I have a lot of black shirts because my excuse is I used to work for Steve Jobs, and he simplified his whole life because he only had the black mock turtlenecks. Well, I live in Texas where it's going to be 108 today, more than 40 for those of y'all that do centigrade, and it's just going to be too hot to wear a long sleeve shirt. So yeah, black short sleeve shirt.
Love it. So we learned about Kevin's background. We learned about the weather. We learned about where he lived, all from one open-ended high gain question. So maybe take inspiration from that. I gave you
and his thought process, right?
And yeah, exactly. We got insight into the deeper thought process there, Adam. That's a great point. So these are all open-ended high gain questions as like a starter package of questions you could ask, and you could build more of your own from there. A great additional reading in this topic area is a book called The Mom Test by Rob Fitzpatrick. Great book on this topic if you want to learn a little bit more. All right, let's say you went out and did this research, you found a problem. The next thing we have to figure out is that a problem that is even worth solving? Because guess what? Not every problem is worth solving. And the guidance that I want to give you here around is a problem worth solving is by passing that problem through 3 simple filters. We need to ask ourselves, is the problem urgent? Is it pervasive? And is the market willing to pay to have that problem solved? If a problem in the market does not pass one or more of these 3 areas, maybe we should move on to another problem that does. And there's a lot more depth. I could probably do a whole additional session just on this topic, but urgency is like criticality. You know, like, are people pounding the table, demanding a solution to this problem now? Or is this the kind of problem that people would look at and say, you know what, Emma, I would like it if you solve that problem, but I can work around it until you get there, right? High urgency problem is one where they're pounding the table. I need a solution now. So I want to find those high urgency problems. Pervasive is just a fancy way of saying broad. Does everyone have this problem, or is it just one person that has this problem, or one company? It is more lucrative and less risky to solve broad-based pervasive problems than very narrow problems. If you solve very narrow problems that only one client has, you're going to build a custom bespoke development shop for individual client, as opposed to building a company that has a repeatable model where you can sell something over and over again. And then willingness to pay kind of speaks for itself. Sometimes a problem is urgent and pervasive, but people are not willing to pay for it. And I don't have my little example here, but all right, let's say here's an example of willingness to pay. Let's say in the top of my little coffee cup here, I just captured some fine Austin air, oxygen. How much are you willing to pay me for this oxygen? 0, right, Adam? But let's think about the first 2 tests. Oxygen, having access to that is an urgent problem. If you don't breathe, you die. It's also pervasive in that everyone's breathing. So it passed my first 2 tests, but not my third. And the reason is that you have a perfectly fine free alternative that you're accessing right now. But that's not always true. Could you think of any places where people do willingly pay for oxygen or air all day long? Where does that happen?
Scuba diving.
Up in like the Himalayas, probably, right?
Yep. So scuba divers, welders, search and rescue, pilots, NASA. You know, you can go to the gas station here in the US and put a coin in the machine to put air in your tires. If you go to Las Vegas, you see people sitting there at the oxygen bar paying to breathe. Like,
it's much needed there.
I mean, it's ridiculous. But in all these examples, the product itself didn't change. It's still O2. What changed was your willingness to pay. And so what it shows us is that willingness to pay is situational. And we've got to keep our finger on the pulse of willingness to pay with research. And I'm happy to chat with anybody offline if you want to learn a little bit more about the research entailed in testing for willingness to pay, because one of the tricky things about assessing are people willing to pay for something is you can't ask them directly. I can't go to somebody and say, hey, here's my product. How much are you willing to pay me for this? They won't tell me because they don't know. And even if they did know, they're going to lie to you. And so you can't go through the front door when asking, are people willing to pay? You have to learn how to go through the back door and assess it in an indirect way, which is really interesting. So that's the first question. Is the problem worth solving? Urgent, pervasive, willing to pay? Good test there. The second question, is this a problem that we should go solve? I like to, this analogy will make sense to my friends here in Texas, but just because there's a lot of money in ice cream does not mean that you should open a Dairy Queen, because that might not be your business model. And so when we think about, is this a good opportunity for us, we might want to filter the problems that are urgent, pervasive, and willing to pay on some key attributes, like does it fit our strategy or the capabilities that we're building or the culture that we're trying to create? By looking at everything in a consistent way, we can find out not only what problems we're solving, but what are the best ones for us to go solve. All right, I want to boil everything we've talked about down, and then we'll finish up here in our last 10 minutes on our last topic. But first, let's wrap up everything we've talked about so far. The answer to most of your questions are not in your building. They're outside with your market, your buyers and users. And so that entails you have to get out from behind your building and go talk to them. And Kev and I also come from an engineering background. It is very tempting for me to bury my head in the technology and spend all day designing UXs and working with, you know, agile software development processes and so on, and thinking about, it's very tempting. I love that. It's like my comfort zone. But if you have a background that is a technologist, especially, you have to learn how to break away from that to go have those direct conversations, those customer development conversations like Adam was talking about with your market.
Yeah, I know, it just makes so much sense just and this is true. Some of you already have businesses, and then some of the people that might hear this today's program might be at the very beginning. Like historically, right now we're very focused on scale ups because of all the activities that's happening between these different countries that we're working with. But I want to make sure that the entrepreneurs that are hearing this, that are like at that very early stage, this is a great framework to be thinking about. What problem set should I solve? Because I mean, I think there's too many of us, especially myself. I've got some examples that I've lost more than $100,000 of my own money on, where I'm like, this is so cool, and then just waste all that time, and all that money is just wasted.
Yeah.
So,
well, let me reframe that. It's a learning experience, but maybe not in the way that you want it.
yeah, no, it's like I didn't go to Harvard Business School. I went to an application I called commitmentmanagement.com, and it's really cool, guys. But
School
how
of Hard
come none of
Knocks.
it? Yeah, no, you're all fools for not using it.
Education is expensive, no matter how you acquire it.
Exactly. Whether it's lived experience or Harvard, you're paying for it one way or another, right?
Exactly.
Well, speaking of scaling, Kevin, that's the last area I wanted to talk about today, because today's talk was about creating a market-driven company and culture. So for those of y'all that are in a mode where you're envisioning your startup, your venture, maybe you're trying to grow it and envision what it's going to look like in the future, I wanted to conclude today with some organizational thinking. So let's say in the beginning, the dinosaurs roamed the earth. There's you, right? You're the founder, right? And so you're founder, CEO, but really, as you start an organization, as you start a company, you're more than just the founder, CEO. You're also taking on all these other roles, right? You're wearing a lot of hats, right? You're running engineering, you're running sales, marketing, product management. And if you were to even dig down further below that, in engineering, you might be doing some development or QA or even UX yourself. In sales, maybe you're doing sales activities yourself. In marketing, maybe you're doing content development or SEO on a certain day of the week. And then in product management, you're doing those activities that we've talked about here today. So in the beginning, it's just you, right? You're doing all this stuff. But eventually, as you grow, as you get investments, or as you convince others to join you, maybe you get a co-founder, maybe a technical co-founder. And that technical co-founder, maybe he or she takes on the engineering side of the world. So we're going to split it between technical and business. But then maybe you say, all right, we're going to start bringing in some employees. So maybe I bring in an employee who's going to run sales. Maybe I give him some equity. Maybe I bring in an employee who's going to run marketing. And then eventually, as you start to mature even more, you start to bring in other employees, maybe contractors, and so on. The point here is that as we create this market-driven culture, I want to think about the future state of the organization and making sure that our market-driven thinking is infused into that from the very beginning. There's a really good book that expands on this topic called The E-Myth Revisited that I'm a big fan of. And it basically says, let's chart out the future org chart of what we want our organization to look like 5 years down the road. And maybe it looks like this or something different. But you're gonna chart out all these roles. Now in the beginning, you are doing all of these roles yourself, but then you're gonna selectively plug people into those over time. And you might even write a job description for each one of those boxes, even though you're doing 7 of those boxes today. But that way, when it comes time to carve off that role and put that hat on somebody else's head, you have exactly what the scope of that role is. And that allows you to then choose and be selective and have some forethought about which areas you're going to focus in on, what your strengths are, versus which ones you want to outsource to other people. And so maybe as a takeaway from today's session, I would encourage you, you can read that book if you want to, I think it's good, but even if you don't want to read the book, chart out the future organizational chart for what you envision your org to look like a year from now, 5 years from now. And then think about which roles you want to hold on to and which ones you want to outsource to others, and then put together the job description for those things you want to outsource.
I find that's so critical, because by making the implicit explicit, like by making it so you can actually see it. In my case, because I'm dyslexic, I was struggling with so many different roles. And I'm like, I have an engineering degree. I graduated with honors. Accounting is easy. Actually, accounting is a pain in the ass. And, I was pushing myself in an area that I didn't need to. And because you can hire a bookkeeper, you can hire an accountant to make all that sort of stuff evaporate. So part of the power of what I hear Paul talking about is just make it explicit so you can actually see what you might be stuck on. Because, it's, I don't know, for me, because of this one thing, it just made all the difference in the world for me.
Yeah, totally. Now, one final point I want to make here before we wrap it up. Let's gray out the other areas for a second. Just focus on founder stuff and product management stuff. There comes an inflection point in every entrepreneur path or every growth path of a company where in the beginning, the first product manager is the founder. He or she is making decisions about the company and the product. And those two things are actually the same because in the beginning, the company and the product are one and the same. But at a certain point in the growth of the company, every founder has to make a choice. And that choice is, do I want to run the company or do I want to run the product? It is really, really hard to do both. This is documented by Noam Wasserman in his book, The Founder's Dilemma. But the basic idea here is you probably have to choose. Do you want to be the chief product manager or chief product officer, or do you want to be the CEO? CEO stuff is recruiting investors, recruiting employees, managing the organizational structure of the company, setting goals, strategy, and metrics, whereas product manager stuff is looking at product success, tuning the product, A/B testing, like all the stuff that goes along with product management. Both of those, as the company grows, are going to be full-time jobs. And if I put both hats on the founder's head, one of them will get neglected. And so you don't have to answer this question for yourself today, but I would encourage you to think about this question going forward. What do you want to be? Do you want to run the product or do you want to run the company? You could do both for a period of time, but if you try to do both forever, it's really, really hard and you may be shortcutting your success in doing so. Is
that timing a gut feeling?
I would refer you to Wasserman's book here. He has some guidance on that. I want to say there's a little bit more to it than gut. There's some like metrics and growth that you can look at. I don't have them off the top of my head. But it is also a little bit of I know it when I see it. I mean, you're going to feel the pull on yourself, when you get there, when you get to a certain point in growth, to say like, wow, I'm spending all day talking to investors, recruiting employees and so on. And I feel like I'm neglecting the product, but the other thing here is it's really hard to, as Kevin says, give up your baby, because like now you're handing over the management of your baby to somebody and they're making day-to-day decisions. There's a high degree of trust that goes along with that. All right. So if you want to connect with me, there's my LinkedIn. I'll send out this deck over to Kevin so you can share it with y'all, and my email as well. Always happy to chat with any of you offline, but Kevin, appreciate the time and hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, no, Paul, I really appreciate your insight. I always learn something, and there's like, it's I appreciate your style too, because you're so engaging with entrepreneurs about how to think through these type of issues and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do is I was going to say part of what we'd like to do, and so that we don't abuse Paul too much with too many emails, what we're going to do is we'll actually have a place to post today's program into our community site, and I'm going to ask Paul to actually hang on for the next week, only for the next week, and just answer questions back and forth on those threads. Part of the power that I find in when we have a speaker, especially with this much engaging information, is it's great to actually have like threads, because as we kind of saw, the community was playing off of each other with the different questions and stuff like that. So yeah, that's great, Paul. What we'll do is we'll wrap up. There was one other thing that got that was in the chat that kind of think really frames this in. Richard Barnett said, "It took me 8 months in school in rural Kenya, embedded with the community, to help the UK-based charity truly understand the long-term sustainability problems that we're trying to address. Lots of technological solutions, but myriad ethnographic factors to understand first." Part of what we're here for, and Paul's pointing to, and this kind of really frames in, so I'm going to take this moment of how we can learn from each other across the world, is exactly this, right? That's part of the power of of a lot of times when I said it at the beginning of the program, all the world's problems have already been solved. Entrepreneurs around the world have already solved most of the problems we'll see. We just need to figure out how to learn how to place that in other places. So that's my take on also what I hear from Paul, and I appreciate the insight. We're going to definitely have you back. I kind of really miss getting to interact with you. Are you going to be speaking on September 9th?
I will not be at Product Camp this year, unfortunately. I've got another commitment that day. But I'm always happy to pop on for one of these whenever you need.
Yeah, well, what we'll do is, I think I can already tell by the messages I've gotten that everyone's like, we got to have this guy back. I'm like, yes, sir. Well, yes, ma'am. We'll definitely do so. So part of what we'll do is, and just wrapping up today, since we try to keep everything to an hour, and I know we'll keep Paul around in the green room right after if you have some other questions and all that sort of stuff. Let me just bring the main program to a close, just so we do it. If you're not in the community already, you can go to techranch.com/connect. There is a free place to sign up at techranch.com/connect. Sign up for the community. If you're in a different country and you want to make sure that this type of work is brought to your country or your part of the world, there's a place to sign up as a country manager, which is essentially a volunteer position to kind of help support the local conversations about what's happening there. There's also, if you have scar tissue to donate to entrepreneurs, there's a place to sign up for our mentor program. We're going to be really rolling out the next stage of that very, very, very soon. So part of what I'd like to do is just make sure that we actually do that. Fatima, you had a quick question. I'm going to go ahead and let that, since you have your hand raised, if you still want to ask the question real quick while we have Paul trapped in here, please go ask away.
Thank you so much. Hello, my name is Fatima. I'm from Chad, new to Austin, currently at the Black Chamber of Commerce. We are here with the program called Yali, the African Youth African Mandela Fellow. Thank you so much, Paul. This was very an eye-opening for a young a professional that come from all Africa to here. And then thanks to the Greater Chamber of Commerce to give us this opportunity. What we'll do, I actually am new in this sector, and one of my wishes list that I wrote it here is to meet someone from the marketing. And today is just a blowing mind. I'm like, this manifestation is real. So we are here, we are new, we have 2 weeks left. And then we will love, I'm here with one of my colleagues, we will love to have probably some time with you, us coming from a different background, different continent, different culture. And my country, Chad, Central of Africa, is completely new to the digital marketing space. And there is a lot of opportunity. And I would love to meet with you and have a chat with you. Thank you to TechCrunch for the opportunity today. This is our second time to attend your event, and it's just mind-blowing for us. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. You keep inspiring us. Thank you.
Hey, Fatima, thank you for sharing that. Are you going to still be in town on the 25th of August?
Yes.
Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to declare that we used to have, it's interesting, for those of you all that are in Austin, we'll have a small informal happy hour on the 25th. I'll see if I can get Paul to join us. And Fatima, if you can, that would be great. What we'll do is for today's, I'll ask Jello to actually send out a message about that. So I tell you what, sorry to be so informal, but it'd be great to actually connect with you while you're still here. I'm going to suggest that we target the 25th of August, 4 p.m. We'll do it in one of Austin's colorful parts of town. I'm not sure if that'll be East Side or Mozart's. We'll announce sometime very soon. We'll post it on the TechCrunch events calendar, but make sure that we have your email address in the chat if you don't mind. And for anyone else that's
sure,
or listening to the podcast, you're welcome to join us as well. I kind of miss those very Austin-esque informal get-togethers because typically that's how we move things forward. All right, well, back to the slides. Just want to make sure that I throw it out there. Part of what we're doing together is building this network of connections around the world. We're using the connective tissue that we learned how to build in Austin back when Austin was a terrible place, a hard place to start a business. And we want to use that same model to extend it around the world as we build venture bridges. If you have any other questions, go to techrange.com/connect, and there's a bunch of different drop-off points into that area. Once again, thank you to Paul. It's always great to connect with, an entrepreneur that has kicked butt, taken names, becoming an expert, and then sharing. So thank you, Paul, for your time. I appreciate it. I do definitely want to have you coming back very soon. It's always my honor to work with entrepreneurs that are driven by vision and values. Let's go change the world for the better together. Okay, y'all take good care. Have a great afternoon, great evening, great morning, and we'll see you again soon.